Uzma, and today I'm going to show you how to make the perfect medium rare prime rib. Such a large chunk of meat may seem a little bit intimidating to tackle due to its size, its price tag, and also this very long cooking process. But no worries, because I have simplified it all down for you. I'm going to show you how to deal with prime ribs from the very beginning all the way to the end, from the preparation to the cooking to the carving, and even how to deal with leftovers. As an extra piece of content, I'm also going to show you how to multitask so that once you have spent a long time in the kitchen and the prime ribs are finally done, you'll have a full meal ready to go. First, let's talk about meat. Since you're going to be spending so much time, money, and effort on this piece of prime rib, you really want to make sure you get the right amount and the right kind. In terms of amount, it is going to be relative to how many people you plan on serving. So the usual guide is about 1 pound of meat per person, or about 1 bone for 2 people. This is of course just a reference. You obviously know your guests better than I do, so if you know you have someone who can eat a lot more or someone who has a smaller appetite, you want to make sure you fine-tune the amount you buy so that you don't end up having a lot of leftovers or not enough to serve everybody. Now, in terms of what kind of prime rib you should get, you have 2 options. You can either get a bone-in prime rib or a boneless prime rib. Most people are going to agree that you should probably get a bone-in prime rib, and I'm definitely on that side as well, because number one, ribs are just a tasty part of a prime rib and you shouldn't really miss out on that. But secondly, the bones act as a natural roasting rack for your prime ribs, and it also provides a little bit of insulation for your meat, so it just overall cooks a little bit more evenly. Now that you have your meat, we can begin to prep it. So I usually like to do the prepping process the night before I know I'm going to cook my meat so that it can have a little extra time to relax in the fridge and have all of the flavors infuse into the meat. However, if you don't have that much time on your hands, you can just do this at least 2 or 3 hours beforehand and still allow it to marinate a little bit longer. It should also taste okay. Here I have my beautiful prime rib. You can see that the fat is nice and marbled throughout, which is what gives it such a great texture. To begin prepping, I have washed my prime ribs and now I'm just using some paper towels to pat it completely dry. You don't want any excess moisture on its exterior. Now I'm going to separate the ribs from the rest of the meat. It's easier to do this now rather than after it's completely cooked. I prefer to keep the ribs still slightly attached to the rest of the meat. I find it easier to work with when you're seasoning and stringing it together. However, you can't cut it all the way off, you'll just have to tie it back together later on. To season, I'm poking some holes inside of my prime rib to create some space to nestle in my garlic slices. If you were to put the garlic or whatever herbs you choose to use on the outside of the meat, it is most likely going to burn and become really bitter, so we're avoiding that in this case. Then sprinkle on some kosher salt, freshly ground pepper, and I'm also using a Montreal steak spice blend, which I got from Costco. It's a really nice blend and it gives you a ton of different flavors, but you can choose to also make your own spice blend or just use fresh herbs. Rub everything in, close off the rib flap that we created, and now we're going to tie the entire piece of meat with a couple strands of twine. This is just to hold the ribs in place and also just keep the entire meat intact. You can also ask your butcher to do this for you by cutting off the ribs and reattaching it so you can skip straight to seasoning. Cut off the excess twine, and now we're going to season the entire meat the way we did before by poking some holes in the meat, nestling in the garlic slices, then generously season the rest of the meat with salt, pepper, and spice blend. You want to give a nice amount of seasoning here because this is such a big chunk of meat, you want to have enough flavor for the entire thing. Rub that all in so the flavor is nice and infused, and now we can talk storage. I've seen lots of people recommend to just put this into the fridge uncovered on a wired rack so they can stay really dry and no excess moisture is created. This way you can get a really crispy exterior. However, that's not the method that I prefer to do because raw meat has a lot of blood inside of it, germs, and that can contaminate the rest of your fridge. So I don't find it to be the most sanitary option to leave it uncovered in your fridge for long periods of time. So my take on this is to take a really large container and place your meat into it. You can even add a tiny little rack on the bottom if you would like. I like to do it this way because in your container you're still going to have airflow, which means the meat won't create a lot of excess moisture, but you're still keeping everything covered, which means the rest of the fridge is going to be protected from all of the bacteria of the meat. My prime rib has been marinating in the fridge overnight, so all of the flavors are now nice and infused into the meat. You want to take this out of the fridge 1 hour before you are ready to cook it so that the meat can fully come to room temperature. And the reason why you want to do that is because if you put a cold piece of meat into the oven, it's going to drop the overall temperature and also cause the meat to be unevenly cooked. I'm using a cast iron grill pan today to cook my prime ribs. You can also use any sort of oven-proof dishware or even a roasting pan, as long as it's big enough to hold prime ribs and have nice and tall rims to keep in the juices, it'll work just fine. So I'm gonna transfer out my prime rib, and you wanna place it into the rack with the rib side facing down. In terms of cook time and temperature, for the first stage, we're cooking at 450 degrees Fahrenheit for 30 minutes. Then for the second stage, turn the heat down to 325 degrees Fahrenheit, and the time that you need to cook at that stage is going to be relative to how heavy your prime rib is. The formula to calculate the time is very simple. It's just 1 pound of meat requires 12 minutes to cook, so you can quickly do the math and you'll know exactly how long you need to cook it for. For me, I have 6 pounds and 11 ounces of meat, and it's going to require 73 minutes of cook time. This is going to end up giving you a medium rare roast. However, you can adjust the time based off of your preference. So if you want it to be a little bit more well done, you can increase the time to about 13 or 14 minutes. And if you want it to be a little bit more rare, you can turn it down to about 11 minutes or so. While the prime ribs are cooking, I'm gonna quickly slice up some veggies and also potatoes so that we can cook this in the same oven using the same heat to save electricity, but also multitask so that you can have a full meal prepared once everything is done. I'm cutting my veggies, potatoes, and squash into nice and thick slices. Try to make them all as even as possible so you don't have ones that burn in the oven. Before baking, drizzle on some olive oil and give it a generous sprinkle of salt. Toss this around, lay it flat on the tray, and place into the oven to bake. Halfway through the bake time, you want to take this out of the oven, use tongs to toss these around so that they can brown evenly, then place it back into the oven and keep baking until the surface is golden brown and everything is crispy. My prime rib is finished cooking. The house smells amazing. As soon as it comes out of the oven, you want to measure the internal temperature of the meat to ensure that it is properly cooked. You can reference this chart to see exactly what temperature you should be looking for. I'm going to transfer it onto a wired rack with a baking tray underneath so that it can rest and have all of its juices drip out of it. Loosely cover this with some aluminum foil so that it stays warm. At this point, your side dish should also be ready. If it's not browning as much, you can turn up the temperature just to help it out. While the prime ribs are resting, I'm going to quickly talk about what to do with the fat that has come out while it was roasting. Now you may choose to make some sort of gravy or sauce with all of this that has been left over in the pan. You can go ahead and do that if you would like and just skip this part. However, I like to actually save this fat that has come out of the meat because it has a ton of different flavors, not only from the ribs itself, but also the spices and the garlic that we put on top of it. So I like to save this and then use it in different meals during the cooking process or spreading it over bread before toasting. It tastes really great. So I've let this cool down just slightly. It shouldn't be burning hot. You want it to be slightly warm so it hasn't solidified fully. And then here I have a fat separator. If you don't have this, you can just pour all of this in some sort of bowl and then scrape off the fat once it has become solidified. That works as well. I'm pouring everything in the skillet into this fat separator to separate the juices from the fat. Then pour the fat into some sort of airtight container. Here I'm using a mason jar. Then you can just store this in the fridge and use whenever you would like. Now we can come back and carve the prime rib, which has been resting for quite a while. You should be able to see the juices that are caught on the bottom of the tray. I'm transferring my prime rib onto a cutting board and I'm going to begin slicing this up. You want to first remove the twine so that you can release the ribs from the entire meat, and you want to just cut this up later on. I didn't show this, but just know that I did cut this up and serve it as well. To carve the rest of this meat, I'm using a pitchfork. You can also use just a really large fork if you don't have one, and I'm using a serrated knife to slice this up. Be generous with this. I like to go at least 1 inch thick with the slices, sometimes even a little bit more than that. If you go too thin though, the meat will fall apart because the prime rib is so loose and tender on the inside. You don't want to risk having your meat fall apart. So you can see that the inside is nice and pink. It is a perfect medium rare, and this is just exactly the way I like my prime rib. Once you have finished carving your meat, it is time to serve it. Now, I may not do it as traditionally as most people would, so do whatever you would like when it comes to how you serve your prime rib. I'm just transferring it onto a plate and then laying the potatoes, veggies, and squash that we baked from earlier on the sides. Since my family is non-traditional, we also like to sprinkle on a little bit more of that Montreal steak spice for extra flavor. Perhaps give it a go, you might end up liking it. After completing a prime rib dinner, you might have some leftovers, and if you don't want to eat it completely on its own, I'm going to show you how to put together a prime rib sandwich. Here I have a large onion. I'm just going to slice it up. Also chop up some parsley and that prime rib. If it is left over and has been in the fridge overnight, it's a lot easier to slice up into thin slices. Here I have some ciabatta rolls, which is my favorite type of bread. Just slice it diagonally in half. Then using that rendered fat from before, I'm spreading this onto my bread. Then just send this off into a toaster oven until it is toasted. Meanwhile, I'm heating up a pan and adding in a little bit more of that rendered fat. I'm going to saute the onions until they're slightly browned. You can choose to make a caramelized onion if you want here, but I'm trying to make this quick. So as soon as the onions are ready, turn off the heat and then add in the meat. Stir it around so that we can heat up the meat but not cook it any further. Once the bread is toasted and brown on top, we can assemble the sandwich. Start by spreading a thin layer of mustard onto your bread. You can use other condiments if you would like as well, but mustard goes really well with prime rib. Add a nice and thick layer of that onion and meat mixture that you just heated up onto the sandwich. Stack this up nice and high and then sprinkle on some more parsley. Finish it off with the other half of that ciabatta roll and enjoy. That's it with this video. I really hope that it made you a little more confident for the next time you want to tackle prime rib. Make sure that you subscribe to my channel if you've liked it and also give it a thumbs up. I really hope to see you guys next time. Bye!